This is The Writer's Voice, new fiction from The New Yorker. I'm Deborah Treisman, fiction editor at The New Yorker. On this episode of The Writer's Voice, we'll hear Rachel Cusk read her story Project from the September 1st and 8th, 2025 issue of the magazine. Cusk is the author of several works of nonfiction and 12 novels, including Outline, Transit, Kudos, and most recently Parade, which won the 2024 Goldsmiths Prize. Now here's Rachel Cusk.
Project. A little while ago I told the actor, M, that I was thinking of writing her autobiography. She liked the idea. She's a good sport. We had met in a bookstore. She was interested in books. In addition to being a film star, she was the model for a popular brand of face cream, and her image looked out everywhere, from shop windows and hoardings and the rain-streaked perspex of bus shelters. In the photograph she appeared very young and happy. Her smile had a sweetness that almost seemed to reproach those who looked at it for their dim and suspicious view of life. She lived in a large house on the other side of the river. In person she was very small, and the house was like a big doll's house, with her as the doll inside it. We knew a couple of people in common. One of them told me a funny story about a dinner they'd attended at a restaurant, where M's bodyguard had insisted that she change places with another film star who was older and less famous, because he worried that M's position at the table exposed her to danger. It was hard not to feel ugly next to M. Part of it was the ugliness of experience. I had never learned how to make experience easier for myself. For M, it was the reverse. Her difficulty lay in her distance from the random violence of insignificance. Personally, I felt saturated with that violence. All my life it had been made clear to me how unimportant I was. M and I both secretly felt that it was the ways in which we had been damaged that had given us our power. It was autumn, and the city became inexorably colder and wetter and greyer. In the face cream advertisement, M remained wreathed in the pink flowers of spring. On sunny mornings, people ran beside the river, men and women running past like gods in the sun, tall, with dazzled eyes and windswept hair. Other men and women lived in tents beneath the stone bridges and brushed their teeth in the water fountains. Sometimes their shoes could be seen, placed neatly side by side outside the tent's zipped entrance. Beside one of the bridges, in the shelter of a high wall, was an outdoor cafe that was warm in the sun, even on the coldest days. People sat there reading or looking at their phones. I was reading a book by a woman who had been sexually abused by her stepfather throughout her childhood. A lot of people knew about this book. It had come into the world and been seized upon and swallowed down, like a draught of something for which people were thirsty. The reason was the unusual tone of the writer's voice, as she testified to things that by rights should have erased her. This tone was neither personal nor impersonal. It possessed a deep and unmistakable authority, the authority of an object. It was as if some household item, a chair for instance, had suddenly gained the power to speak. The writer did not feel in any way sorry for herself, and this made her unbreakable. It's possible that the success of her book was some kind of compensation or reward for the things that had happened to her, but it seemed unlikely. If she was unbreakable, success could have no more power over her than misfortune. M had told me that starring in a film as a child had immediately brought her childhood to an end. The writer was saying the same thing about the deeds of her stepfather. Not being seen was perhaps equivalent to being seen by everybody. M said that the script of her first film had originally included several scenes in which the child was shown wanting or inviting sexual interaction with the central male character. This need for the child to express volition in the fulfillment of male desires was mentioned in the book too. The stepfather was always claiming that the abuse was not something he was doing to his stepdaughter, but something they participated in together. M's mother had objected to those dubious scenes, so they were cut from the script. In the book about the stepfather, the big problem was that the mother didn't notice what was going on. She didn't notice acts of an extraordinary shamelessness and depravity that were happening for years in her own house. The father, a harmless character who came to visit the children at weekends, didn't notice either. The writer of the book remembers, as a child, being conscious of the fact that by saying only a few words, she could entirely destroy her family. She did not say those words. Why not? It was no more possible for her to say those words than it would have been for a chair. Yet afterwards, people were always asking her why she hadn't said something. To have childhood brought to an end is perhaps also to be placed outside of time. The writer of the book about the stepfather described how other people continued to live in time, while she herself was preserved in incidents that perennially recurred, that were eternally still happening to her, no matter how old she got. A film is also always happening. Its origins in time have been frozen through the process of recording. M could always be found in her films, living the same instance over and over. The stepfather had recorded himself on the writer of the book. M said that when her first film came out, the children at school bullied her. They called her a slut. She decided to study and work hard. She decided to be smart, which was the opposite of being a slut. That she had the capacity to decide was one result of her childhood having ended. It had become obvious to her that reality could be engineered. Everyone else believed in reality. It was as if they, not she, were in a film she was watching. The writer of the book about the stepfather also began to work assiduously at school, getting top grades in every subject. Later, at his trial, the stepfather used this as evidence that no real harm had been done to her, and claimed that his actions may even have contributed to her success. There was a small boule court adjacent to the cafe beside the bridge, and the cafe's proprietor rented out sets of the heavy little balls to her customers. She was frequently to be seen playing there herself, with the 3 men in her employ, whom she dominated and mesmerized like a matriarch. She was a short, sturdy woman with a broad masculine face. Her voice was loud and hoarse, calling out comments or exhortations concerning the game. Whenever she spoke, the 3 men would instantly look up, like guilty dogs. When it rained, there were no runners, and the cafe was shuttered up beside the empty boule court. The tents under the bridges stayed the same. My partner had to go into hospital. There was something wrong, but no one could work out what it was. The doctors kept telling us to prepare ourselves for bad news, but instead there was no particular news. The hospital was on the other side of the city, and it was a long walk each day at visiting hours. The route passed through different areas, whose different atmospheres came and went. Prosperous stretches giving way to rougher ones, and then becoming prosperous again, like a perpetual argument or a struggle for victory. There were always tests and procedures that needed to be done. The doctors had put a 3-way valve into the back of my partner's hand so that they could take blood whenever they wanted. When they needed to do a procedure, they wheeled the whole bed with my partner in it out of the room and down the corridor to somewhere else. I stayed in the empty room, waiting on a plastic chair beside the window. The removal and return of the beer-like bed was like a rehearsal for absence. The walk to the hospital went past an old cinema that was always half empty. You could just buy a ticket at the door and sit down. I didn't go to the cinema or watch films very often, though my partner always wanted to. I was suspicious of the power of distraction that films possessed. Their total sensory invasion was overwhelming. It could sometimes take days to recover from seeing a film. It was as though, by watching the film, you acquired a set of memories that were not your own. For a while everything looked different, as if the film were still happening outside in the world. Even in the best films, things were made to seem more possible than they actually were, especially cruelty. The possibility of cruelty was nearly always present in films. It was as if, in films, people could do whatever they wanted, and were simply choosing not to for now. It was as if there were no law. At the hospital, it was possible to watch films on a laptop in bed, at any time of day or night. Apparently it was hard to sleep in that neon-lit building, where machines beeped unceasingly, and the doctors and nurses came in every few hours to do their checks. My partner complained about the constant interruptions. Yet it also seemed desirable to be constantly interrupted, to have the responsibility for oneself taken away. When visiting hours ended, The feeling of relief I felt at leaving the hospital gradually became a feeling of fear. It was a fear of freedom. Being able to do what I wanted made me afraid that I had never done what I wanted. The things I wanted to do, such as leave the hospital at the end of visiting hours, did not make sense. The next day, I was as impatient to return to the hospital as I had been to leave it. One day, passing the old cinema on the way home, I noticed that a film was about to start, and I went in. The film was about the end of childhood. It concerned a boy who is incriminated by his own innocence and honesty in his dealings with authority. He is an ordinary boy, no better or worse than other boys, except for this honesty which marks him out and enrages his parents, his teachers, society itself. The authorities try to contain and destroy his honesty, and each time that they fail, authority itself is made to look more and more senseless, which enrages the authorities even more. The boy's school punishes him. His parents wash their hands of him, and in the end he is sent to a remedial institution, although in fact he has done nothing wrong. He runs away from this place, runs and runs without knowing where he is running to. The camera follows him running, through woods and along paths until he reaches the sea. He has never seen the sea before. He runs into the water and then realizes that he cannot run across it. He stops and he turns around and looks back. Watching a film was a means of surrendering control over what could not, in any case, be controlled. When it ended, my obligation to reality seemed to have diminished. But perhaps the consequence was that some deeper servitude had been inflicted elsewhere. Life was easier if you watched films, just as life was easier if you flew in airplanes. The same problems of time and space that arose when you flew somewhere, rather than travelling by land and sea, seemed to apply also to films. The reduction of the element of time, relative to that of space, created a moral imbalance that was also a liberating convenience. Reading books did not make life easier in the same way. It took time to read a book. Watching a film temporarily broke the power of time. This was one reason it had felt right not to watch too many of them, though most other people didn't seem to see it that way. There was so much in the world already, so many problems that needed to be solved, without complicating things by reenacting what had already happened, or was happening somewhere right now, or might never happen. A film went to great effort to reconstruct material events, a war, for instance, while subverting the rule of time. The film, and thus the war, took a couple of hours. The time it took to make the film might, in some cases, have been the same as the time it took to fight the war. Outside the cinema, day had become night. The streetlights had come on. Wherever Em goes, people recognize her. Everyone knows who she is, except me. When I met her, I had no idea who she was. One day she invited me to have coffee in the garden of a hotel near her house. It was a wealthy part of the city, and the hotel was very luxurious. There were men in peaked caps at the entrance, waiting to greet the guests as they emerged from their limousines. The morning was brilliantly sunny. The raw gold light fell in sharp angles across the entrance and flashed on the windows of the cars. Inside, the man at the desk told me that the garden was closed for winter. He pointed towards a big glass door barred by a heavy iron grille to prove it. Beyond the iron bars, some ornamental trees and a small expanse of lawn could be seen. I went outside again and stood in the slashing light on the steps beside the men in peaked caps. After a while, Em came running up the road, apologetic and out of breath. We went back into the hotel together. She asked the man at the desk whether we could sit in the garden, and he was instantly obliging. He summoned a flock of smiling, uniformed staff to unlock the iron grille and open the big glass door and remove the winter covers from the garden furniture. Em was sweet and polite and grateful as they did all this. The waiters brought out coffee and a platter of exotic fruits and some blankets in case we felt cold. This was how people and things behaved around her. Reality became malleable, was always giving way and changing its rules. In a sense, it was the same lawlessness as that of films, as though Em were always in a film, even when she wasn't. It seemed like the greatest good fortune to have been removed from reality and its rules in this way. Sitting in the garden, Em said that she did not consider herself to be an artist. She saw herself as merely an element in the creations of others. She did not possess the fundamental power of choice that a creator has. She had acquired some of that power later, through fame. She was using it not to create, but to try to make her life seem more normal. As often as she could, she took her children to school and walked her dogs and met up with her friends in a normal way. It was as if, having been removed from reality, she had made it her life's goal to find it again. She had been spared the shame and stress of creativity at its intersection with reality. It might be said that creative people were people whose childhoods hadn't ended. There was no particular basis for thinking this, other than the fact that most children created things, and most adults didn't. In a way, it was terrible, the idea that childhood might not end. Being a creator was like being a dog that keeps running away from its violent master. For a while it runs free. It runs and runs in search of something, but in the end there is nowhere else for it to go but back home. It was cold in the garden, despite the sun. My coat was too thin. An operation had been scheduled for my partner. The night before, I went to see a film about a doctor in a run-down neighbourhood who is trying to educate the residents about the risks to their health that their way of life entails. They drink and take drugs. They bathe in contaminated water. Tuberculosis is rampant. There is gang violence. They don't listen to the doctor. In fact, they even make fun of him. The doctor himself is an alcoholic. His self-abuse is the product of despair, whereas the community behaves as it does out of ignorance. The operation was to take place in the afternoon, during visiting hours, and for the first time since my partner had been in hospital, I was late. Each day before that, I had arrived exactly when visiting hours began, even though there was no particular urgency that required me to be there, and nothing to do other than keep my partner company. I would get into the wheeled bed, and sometimes I would fall asleep, so that often when the nurses came in, their voices woke me up. They were always very nice. They thought it was funny. I brought things for my partner to eat, because apparently the hospital food was disgusting. Yet whenever I saw that food, I secretly thought that I would have been happy to eat it. The institutional-looking shapes and colours on the plastic tray were comforting. My partner's refusal to be comforted by this institutional food struck me sometimes as pointlessly obstructive, and at other times as a sign of self-respect. Was it evidence of courage or of weakness to reject the hospital food? The room was on the second floor, and from the windows the tops of people's heads could be seen below as they walked across the car park. Raw young trees stood in concrete planters between the parking spaces, and the wind was often whirling through their naked branches. The windows were very thick and sealed, and no noise came through them. The action of the wind in the tossing forms of the trees was like an attempt at description or communication across this silence. Each day, when visiting hours were over, I had gone down in the lift and walked out into what had been visible moments earlier from the windows of my partner's room. The sudden addition of sensation to the mute scene, of sound and cold and the feeling of wind or rain, was part of a transition that could never be grasped, no matter how many times it happened. All I knew was that in that moment of leaving the hospital, I was safe from something that was of the greatest significance to me. Walking out through the doors, I was temporarily safe from my own love and need for another person. When I arrived this time, the door to my partner's room stood wide open. The wheeled bed was gone, and the room was empty, except for the plastic chair beside the window. I sat down in the plastic chair in the empty room and waited. The reality of the hospital felt unreliable. It was very big and efficient, but it had come from nowhere. It was not underpinned by a system of memory. This absence of memory seemed to promise either an ultimate transformation or an ultimate loss. It was as if only the power of memory would cause my partner to return. I had a message from Em, wishing my partner well. She asked whether there was anything she could do to help. Part of Em's freedom was her freedom to choose how to be. Of all the things she could have chosen, she had selected goodness. Em had told me that she didn't see a therapist. She took advice from her accountant. Her accountant was very down-to-earth. She looked at Em's problems from a practical point of view. "Oh, grow up," the accountant sometimes said to her. I occasionally thought of Em's parents as having sold her, though it probably wasn't like that. The writer of the book about the stepfather also seemed to have been offered up and given to the world. The ending of childhood was not just a premature exposure to reality. It was a forsaking of the possibility of return. There was nowhere to go back to, no dream country where the original self might one day be found. Instead, one was woken into an eternal, godlike vigilance, as though the experience of objectification had in the end borne the fruit of objectivity. Em knew that it was pointless to think about the past or the future, to feel self-pity, to believe in a story of life. She knew that people shouldn't try to fix or solve their characters. This was how others got power over them. Instead, they should act the part of themselves. My partner was weak after the operation. We decided to go to the coast for a few days. Through the windows of the train, the steel-grey clouds were low and full, but better things were forecast. Most of the other passengers were asleep. In sleep, their features had assumed extra emphasis and individuality, sometimes disturbing to watch. It was as if they had surrendered their daytime talent for obliterating the outward traces of themselves in exchange for mental obliteration. There seemed, at that moment, to be nothing in the world more desirable than to be an actor. We live in the same city, but millions of other people live there too. In the morning, at dawn, a full bright moon still hangs in the pale sky, suspended among the power lines. The passage of the street cleaners begins as the sun rises. The city is wet and shining. A woman is propped up in a doorway in a sleeping bag, looking at her phone. An old man squats in the brilliant light and defecates onto a square of newspaper he has laid out neatly for the purpose. Everywhere people are running or walking or cycling. We do not know where they have come from or where they are going. We too run or walk, taking exercise, walking our dogs. We do not belong in this city, but we have chosen to live here. This is true of other people too. We have all decided to live somewhere we don't belong. The people who do belong here may wonder why we made that choice. We have been freer to choose than most people are. But is the truth, in fact, that we don't really belong anywhere? The city is beautiful. That's one reason we chose to live here. At other times in our lives, we lived where we had to, where circumstances or other people required us to live. For a long time, before we came here, we lived somewhere that seemed to be permanent. When we left that place, it felt like an opportunity to leave certain aspects of our own history behind. We realized that we could play a role in creating ourselves, rather than simply being created, as we had been before. The city is beautiful. It is a masterpiece of civilization. At some point in the modern era, a big, ugly tower was built here, the only one of its kind. The city is quite compact, and this tower can be seen from everywhere. It is much taller than most of the other buildings. It is brutal in its ugliness. There is a joke that the only really good view of the city is from the windows of this building, because only from there can you not see it. The inexorability and power of ugliness are demonstrated by the fact that wherever in the city you are, even in the most unlikely places, the building is nearly always visible. The same instinct that created the city's beauty also created this tower, except in reverse. There are mad people here, angry people, people who shout and rail in the streets. There are men who walk around in rags, their genitalia showing. There are women who shout and shout at the empty air. Because the city is so beautiful, the unhappiness of these people is more noticeable. No one helps them or does anything about them. We have lived in places that were uglier, but more compassionate. The cafes and restaurants here are bustling and full. The cultural venues are sold out. The parks and museums and landmarks bask in the winter sun, thronged with people. They will not allow their lives to be ruined by these unfortunate others. They pretend not to see them, or perhaps they actually don't see them, in the way that a fiction writer chooses deliberately or otherwise not to see what will threaten the fiction's representation of the world. We, however, see them. Like the ugly tower, we see everything from where we are, except ourselves. Fame is perhaps this tower, an ultimate entrapment in the self that is also a deliverance from it. We walk our dogs, we take our children to school, we work on our projects. Despite the regularity of these activities, each day at its beginning is completely unknown to us. This is because, in a sense, we are free. Our childhood, our parents, our native land. Even the years we've lived are all either dead or far away from us. For other people, this situation might be a tragedy. But in all these same periods and places, we have recorded things. These recordings function like a kind of filter or sieve, retaining one part of us while the rest is allowed to drain away. Our recordings are our memories, our histories. The people who know us, our friends, understand this about us. They understand that we don't have the same relationship to our lives or the lives of others as they do. They understand that if something goes wrong, if there is any kind of personal emergency, it is to some degree a public emergency also. It is a crisis of form, reality recording itself on us rather than the other way around. Being able to create ourselves has felt like the greatest, the final privilege. For years we have created our recordings. We have driven and sometimes abused ourselves so as to create them. We have risked health and happiness, order, security. Other people have cared about and preserved those things, happiness, security, in their own lives. They haven't taken the risks we have taken, which often weren't even risks, but cold-hearted decisions to put our projects ahead of all other considerations. But now that we've decided to create ourselves, now that we have the leisure and the capacity to consider our own health and happiness, we can take a different attitude to these risks. We can refuse to do certain things, or decide to do them differently. Each day is completely unknown to us, just as our recordings were unknown before we made them. When we made our recordings, a spirit possessed us, a set of instincts that were as precise and exacting as scientific laws. We understood this science almost unconsciously. We subjected ourselves to its rigour, and when we were finished we felt empty and exhausted, as though after a night of passion or nightmares or sleepwalking. It was as if we had deserted our own conscious minds, and the return to consciousness afterward was often painful and strange. It has proved slightly difficult to bring this mechanism to the creation of ourselves. Often we don't know what to do, how to occupy ourselves. Then at other times we're very busy, and the idea of creating ourselves seems less important. But suddenly we find it is there, the question, who are we? Yet everyone else seems to know who we are. When our children were little, we would dress them. They would hold up their arms as we pulled an item of clothing over their head. They would shoot their arms straight up in the air. The arms would go into the sleeves, and for a moment their head and face were muffled in the garment. We would wiggle and pull, and then their head would appear again through the neck hole. Their cheeks would be red, their hair slightly unruly. They would be laughing. They always found it funny, this moment when their head was inside the garment. They thought they had disappeared and then come back again, like a magic trick. They held up their arms trustingly, waiting to be made to disappear. We feel there is no one in the whole world we could trust like that. No one who could dress us. No one who could make us disappear.
That was Rachel Cusk reading her story project. This is her second story in The New Yorker. You can hear more New Yorker fiction read by the authors on NewYorker.com and on the New Yorker apps available from the App Store or from Google Play. On the New Yorker Fiction Podcast, we invite writers to choose stories from the magazine's archives to read and discuss. This month, Lauren Groff reads The Faithful by Elizabeth Hardwick. You can subscribe to that and other New Yorker podcasts by searching for The New Yorker in your podcast app. Tell us what you thought of this podcast by rating and reviewing The Writer's Voice in Apple Podcasts. This episode of The Writer's Voice was produced by John LeMay. I'm Deborah Treisman. Thanks for listening.
You come to the New Yorker Radio Hour for conversations that go deeper, with people you really want to hear from, whether it's Bruce Springsteen or Questlove or Olivia Rodrigo, Liz Cheney, or the godfather of artificial intelligence, Geoffrey Hinton, or some of my extraordinarily well-informed colleagues at The New Yorker. So join us every week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, wherever you listen to podcasts.